Hey everyone, Karen from Katie Gecko Knits here. For those of you who are not big on Instagram or you didn't catch my video about my swatch experiment, I thought I would just put this up on YouTube so that you guys can hear the results of my experiment. Many of us, naughty, are not big swatchers. We should be, and I think I have become a convert. So what I did is I did 3 different swatches, all the same yarn, all the exact same needle. In the case of my 3 swatches, I was using a Chow Goo metal needle with the red cord. I love those. Oh, I love so many needles, but I really like those a lot. And so I used the exact same needle on all my swatches. I know a lot of people who steam block their swatches and steam block their garments, and they don't wash them, or they may not wash them until a year down the road. I was curious if steam blocking resulted in the same gauge as wet blocking. My instinct told me it probably was not, but I didn't know because the only time I steam block is just to get an idea of something, but I do not use it as my final gauge determination or anything like that. So what I did is, let me set these aside. Okay, so this was my very first swatch. Now you can see here that I knit a pretty big swatch. I've heard that 4x4 swatches are not always the best because you really need a bigger piece of fabric to get an accurate gauge. For my experiment, I decided this was big enough, and this is about 7.5 inches by just over 5.25 inches, this particular gauge. But of course, I have my border here, and so my actual stockinette gauge is about 6.5 inches by 4.25 inches. So this particular swatch, and just so you guys know, this is all a 100% superwash DK light worsted yarn. So as I said, I used a size 6 needle. I measured it, I did my gauge, and I measured in a few different places. I measured my gauge pre-blocking, and I got 22 stitches and 29 rows to 4 inches. So then I wet blocked it, so I wash it, squeeze out the excess water, let it dry, and I got 21 stitches by 29 rows to 4 inches. So the row gauge didn't change. But the stitch gauge did. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot because it's only 1 stitch over 4 inches. However, if you calculate that out over many, many stitches, that could make a big difference in the end dimensions of your garment. Let's say a sweater, okay? So that was that swatch. I decided I was going to work a knit and around swatch, which I have to say, they're so sloppy. So I did that. I took my pre-blocking measurements, which were 20 stitches and 29 rows to 4 inches. I steam blocked it, and I got the exact same gauge, 20 stitches and 29 rows to 4 inches. So steam blocking, now that was what I got. I don't know if anyone else has conducted this experiment. If you have, I would really be interested to know if you if your results were similar. After chatting with someone who I know steam blocks swatches, I started wondering, really, is that really an accurate representation of the gauge? So that's why I did all of this, right? So my pre-block and my steam block, same gauge. Then I wet blocked this, and I got 19 stitches by about 30 rows to 4 inches. So it grew a little bit in length because superwash does stretch. And again, it was only 1 stitch over the 4 inches difference. But again, If you are calculating that out, I think it was like 3/4 of an, instead of 4 stitches per inch, it was like 3.75 stitches per inch. And so while that isn't a lot, if you take that 1/4 of an inch difference and you've got a lot of stitches, that could be the difference of, a couple of several inches in the size of your garment, the width. So that was an interesting finding. Again, the steam block and pre-block were the same. Then I was curious because I found doing the in the round swatch, I know they are cute, right? They're very cute, and you make your little tube and then you cut it and it's really cute. The problem with that is that you are unable to reuse this yarn. And if you're working with a limited number of skeins and you might need this yarn, then you're kind of stuck. So that to me is kind of the downside of knitting in the round, the swatching in the round. If you really need it, then, if you do cut the back, I know some people don't. They don't cut the back of the yarn in case they need it. Because I found swatching in the round a little bit of a pain in the butt, and I don't have a problem knitting the purl stitch or working the purl stitch. I don't have a problem purling. Depending on how you knit and what your tension is, your purl stitches might be much bigger. Not much. They might be larger, slightly larger than your knit stitches. And that results in rowing out on the back of your work. Now you can see here I have no rowing out, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. And actually, I'm going to look at my very first swatch, and I don't really have any rowing out there. So I did pretty good with my gauge here. My tension was pretty steady, which was great. For my final experiment, now, we know that knitting in the round, since we are not purling, our knit stitches tend to be a little more consistent and a little more snug than if we were working flat and working a knit row and then a purl row. Because for many of us knitters, our purl stitches are a little bit bigger than our knit stitches. And that is why when we do an in the round sweater, it is recommended we do in the round swatching. Now, I know that my purl stitches, I'm really working hard, that if I knit something flat, I'm working very hard to keep my tension consistent. So I try to knit my purl, or I try to work my purl stitches a little tighter than normal, so I don't have rowing out, and that my purl stitches are about the same size as my knit stitches. And I think part of the reason that is true, I've heard this and I think it's correct, that when you make the purl stitch, you're using just a tweak bit more yarn to work that purl stitch than you do when you work a knit stitch. So I got to wondering, instead of working a swatch in the round, instead of doing that and wasting yarn that you may or may not have, because the purl stitches can be a little bigger, what if I worked the knit side on one needle size, and then I worked the purl side one needle size down? Because I was using a 6 on all of my swatches, I used a size 6. Well, I actually worked my garter cast on here. I worked all that on a size 6 needle. I didn't worry about switching back and forth because, of course, it's all knit stitches anyway, right? So when I got to the stockinette portion, I worked a size 6 on the knit side, and I worked a size 5 on the purl side. So what I got here for my gauge, when I finished, my pre-block measurements were 21 stitches and 29 rows to 4 inches. My steam block stitches were 21 stitches to 29 rows to 4 inches. So it was exactly the same. And my wet block stitches were about 19 stitches and 30 rows to the 4 inches. And that is what I got on knitting in the round. So my gauge was the same here after wet blocking as it was here. And because I didn't mind doing a knit in the round swatch, but I don't know, I found it a little tedious trying to make sure that I was leaving enough yarn behind that I could cut it later. Well, I cut it because this was an experiment and I'm not reusing this yarn, so I did cut it. So while this isn't a huge pain in the butt to do for me, I know some people love doing swatching in the round. I can't say I'm a huge fan of it. It's not the end of the world, but I'm not a huge fan. If I'm going to get the same gauge by knitting with 2 different needle sizes, then I think for me, I prefer to knit and do my swatch in 2 needle sizes. Now, I know some of you might think, oh my God, what if you forget and you use the same needle size? Well, yes, that is a little bit of an issue. So I did, if you have interchangeables, you can just put, a size 6 on one end and a size 5 on the other so that you don't have to think about it. I do not have any interchangeable needle sets yet. Now that I'm considering doing much more swatching, because I think it's very important, I'm a convert, as I said, I'm a convert to swatching. I think I may invest in an interchangeable needle set because I think it will be very important for me that when I am working gauge swatches, or even if I'm working a project flat, which I like to do, I feel like there's more control in garment design and knitting if you work flat. So I think an interchangeable needle set will do me quite well. It'll serve me well. Anyway, you guys, I just wanted to share with you. So that was interesting. Again, the difference in the gauge between pre-blocking, steam blocking, and wet blocking isn't huge, right? You might say, oh, big deal, it's 1 stitch over 4 inches. But depending on the size of your project, that may make a huge difference in the final dimensions of that project. There you have it from the get-go. Have a great day, and I will see you guys, even though you don't see me now. I'm behind the curtain. I will see you guys soon. Bye.